And I'm the owner and director of Paradigm Human Performance. This is a very new organisation that I set up very recently. So previous to this, I've worked for EDF Energy, where I was their Human Performance and Organisational Learning Fleet Manager for the nuclear and coal-fired and gas fleet. Prior to that, I spent a number of years in the rail industry, building trackside substations and distribution networks, etc. And prior to that, I was with Balfour Kilpatrick, Balfour Beatty, Balfour Power Networks, and whatever other guises of that organisation. So this is just a little bit about what we do, and this is about human performance, leadership development, health and safety, the traditional stuff, but also what we're looking at is this new concept of safety differently, or safety too, which some of you might have heard about, and it just has a different sort of flavour around about the worker and how we as management and as leadership set our workers up to either succeed or fail. We run a number of open training events in these sort of specialist areas, and we're working with a number of clients around the world at the moment. So we're going to talk about a breakdown of occurrences. I'm going to explain some of those to you. We're going to talk about performance modes, and I heard somebody mention them in the room next door, so I know that some of you are familiar with performance modes. We're going to talk about the with model, which is about error precursors, and then we're going to look at some of the particular error precursors we see around the type of switching activities that a lot of your people are involved in. So looks like there's a lot up there, but what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and just flick through some stuff, and if there's something that you particularly would like me to dive into a little bit deeper, then stop me, shout out, and we can do that. Is that all right? Yeah? Okay, excellent. And can you hear me at the back okay? Yeah. I've got a big microphone. So sometimes what I talk about, it can be a little bit controversial if you are really talking in your organisations about traditional health and safety management and traditional behavioural safety, where we start to look at the worker and the worker behaviours. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if some of the stuff you see on my slides and some of the stuff you hear me talk about is really controversial for you, that you violently disagree with, please shout up, but we haven't got long for a long debate. So just go with the premise that, is it reasonable to believe that these things may be fact? Okay? And from my sort of 20 plus years in industry, these are my own personal observations, and this is what I've set up my organisation around, because I see so many organisations from a cross-section of industries who maybe are getting some of these things fundamentally wrong. So the majority of employees are good people with the best intentions, trying to do the right thing for their employer. Would you generally agree with that? No violent opposition to that one. Leaders often unintentionally and unknowingly reinforce behaviours. Absolutely. Organisational weaknesses, latent conditions, they're hidden traps which set people up to fail, and they exist everywhere. So, flawed defences, we're talking about the James Reason Swiss cheese type model here, yeah? So we know that we set people to work with procedures that may not be up to the quality or the standard that we need them to be. We may be introducing new technology and not quite keeping up with the training. I noticed from Jonathan's slides, and I'm sure this was just a slide, but you know, training, and underneath it said toolbox talk. Toolbox talks are not training. That is not a training tool. They're a great just-in-time refresher tool, but we don't want to be delivering training through toolbox talks. Hindsight bias can lead even the best investigation teams down the wrong path. How many times as a leader have you scratched your head and said, how the bloody hell did he do that? Why didn't he, how could that happen? Why didn't he see that was what, hindsight bias, great. It's fantastic, because you're standing at the other end of that tunnel, looking back, and you can see all of the defences that failed. If you put yourself into the worker's shoes, which is a lot about what I do when I come and work with organisations, that looks nothing like the vision that you've got from after the event. There's no such thing as a repeat event when human behaviours are involved. and therefore typical corrective actions fail to deliver. So let me just be very clear on this. There are repeat outcomes. Very often we do see repeat outcomes. Would you agree? So the same event, you know, the same system failed, the same event happened, the person had the same accident, so the outcome is the same. But very often what our investigations fail to do is really understand the sequence of events that led up to that particular event on that day under the conditions that were specific to that day. Okay, so this is one thing that I see a lot of organisations fail on, and myself, I'm an incident investigator. This is what I've done for years. I've done that as well. And human error is another form of business risk which can be mitigated. So very often we talk about human performance and we dive straight into safety. We think about safety. Actually, human performance is about all business effectiveness. And if we can make sure that when we set our people to work, that we're setting them up to succeed instead of fail, there are lots of benefits for us to reap from being able to do that. So safety tends to look at, behavioural safety tends to look at where people are a problem to be solved. And human performance, or safety differently, or safety 2, you'll hear lots of interchangeable terms, looks at it that people are the power to harness. They are the clue to solving the problem. Okay, so it's a bit of a different dynamic. I would expect that some of you will have seen this diagram or a very similar one before, and what this does is it talks about occurrences. So we take events, near hits, near misses, the whole bucket of things that go wrong in our organisations. And when we break them down, what we typically find is about 20% of them are down to sort of equipment failures, catastrophic failures that go wrong with our plant and our equipment and our machines, etc., etc. And 80% of those will have some human error involved. Yeah? So that's pretty easy to say. We look and go, well, there was a person. And traditionally, that's where our investigation starts and ends. We say, who was the last person who touched it? Oh, well, okay, let's interview him. Yeah? And let's get to the bottom of what he did and why he did it. However, when we apply a human performance evaluation investigation, what we actually find is that of that pie, 70% of the times when we have a human error event, there is an organisational weakness that has set that person up to fail. And then we look at probably about 30% individual. Now this slide was around about 2012, this slide was made up, and since then, as I say, in the organisations that I've worked with, we've done a more accurate one of these. I'm working with a generator in Australia, big construction company in America at the moment, and we've done this for them. And actually, what that looks more like is 92% organisational weakness and 8% individual. And when we get down to that individual, we're really talking about willful violations and negligence. Yeah, we really try and drill down to that. It's very rare to find it, because don't forget principle number 1, which was, can you remember? People are generally good, yeah, they're good and they're trying to do the right thing for their employer. It is actually quite rare to find somebody who comes to work every day planning to have an accident. They don't generally come planning to piss you off for the day. Okay. Quick dive into performance modes. So again, where do we see errors and when do workers make errors? Okay, so this is just a whistle-stop tour. There are 3 general performance modes that our workers are in when they go to work. Okay. Is there anyone in the room who is not familiar with this at all? Excellent, excellent. Okay. Now when we look at these knowledge, rule and skill-based performance modes, they have a massive impact on the error rate that workers are making. Okay, so if somebody's working in that knowledge base, which is that they're in a totally unfamiliar situation. Now if you think back to Jonathan's presentation, I'm guessing that your industry is going to be seeing a lot of this. You guys are dealing with new technology. One thing I've learned this morning is, boy, are you in a transition period, technological change, and it seems to have come upon you pretty quick. We talked at first this morning, the first speaker talked about we've had a period of stability. You know, we've been pretty stable in this industry, and now suddenly we're running to catch up with new technology that's coming in. So actually, how often you guys go to work in this knowledge-based mode? And where they are, the error rate generally is 1 in 10. So every 10 times they perform this activity, they're likely to suffer one error. Rule-based, so where they're following procedures. Following procedures, having to think about what they're doing, having to take that instruction. The error rate drops down to, or goes up to 1 in 1,000. And then when we're in skill-based, our error rate will go to 1 in 10,000. So what mode do you think you want your workers to be working in? Don't be afraid, I will bite. Yeah, we would like our workers to be in skill-based mode, wouldn't we, a lot of the time. So the great analogy of this is driving a vehicle, yes? So you've all heard about you driving along, how many of you have to think about changing gear, how many of you have to think about the things that you're doing to make the car move forward. You don't. Generally, you're in a skill-based mode. It comes naturally to you. If you know how to drive, you've been doing it for a number of years, then you'll be driving in skill-based. How many of you have arrived at your destination and thought, oh Christ, how did I get here? I forgot most of the journey, yeah? You're in a skill-based mode. Believe it or not, a lot of our workers are working day in, day out in that skill-based mode. The rule-based, then somebody steps out from the curb or the traffic light changes to red just as you're approaching it, and suddenly you know there's a rule that's going to kick in. Okay, so your mode of performance changes at that point, and you'll switch into a rule-based. So somebody comes, the rule is you swear to avoid it. Knowledge-based is where you might be driving past a school and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, and there's a sign which is going to be telling you what speed should you be driving generally. About 30 miles an hour, yeah, definitely. And you will be normally complying with that rule. Okay, so that's when you switch through those modes. How familiar do you think your workers are when they're going to work and operating your equipment and working on your network? How many times during any task or activity do you think they stop and think, I've just moved out of skill base and I've moved into rule base. Now something's got to change. Actually, I've just moved out of skill base and I'm right up into knowledge base because I've just encountered something that I'm not used to, that I've not experienced before. When do you think the majority of our people switch into knowledge base? When do you think? When
they're prompted.
When they're prompted, but what about when they automatically trip into knowledge base? Let me tell you, it's when things go wrong. Yeah, when we have something that we've not encountered before. Yeah. So when something goes wrong, an alarm goes, the system goes down, whatever it may be, that's when they jump up into that knowledge base. When do we tend to put lots of procedure and process around people? Exactly at that time. So things are going wrong, they're in uncharted waters, and suddenly we build a lot of procedure around them. Okay, we can make things very complicated. So it's worth thinking about these modes when you are setting your people to work and when you're considering your procedures and your processes. What kind of mode of performance are your workers in at what point during the activity? Safety protects me from the system, human performance protects the system and others from me. That's kind of a nice way of trying to look at this from a different perspective. Okay. So this is a model that we call the with model, or some call it the twin model, and they use the N of human nature. But these are the kind of things that we're looking for when we set people to work. So these are the error precursors, typical, most common error precursors. Every industry, every job, everyone will come across them. And we have tools in human performance programs that says to people, actually, we're going to do a pre-job brief, which we'll talk about in a minute, and we're going to stop and we're going to think about, are any of these error precursors, are they present today? Are they present? Are they things that we need to be thinking about today? And if they are present, what are we going to do about them? So this goes slightly beyond looking at what are the hazards. Let's brief each other on the method statement and the risk assessment. Yeah, this is a little bit more in depth. And this is a little bit more about today's conditions, situational awareness. What are we faced with today on this job? Now, picking up on something that was sort of being talked about this morning, some people on our table were talking about, they seem to see a lot of accidents or injuries or even errors when people return from a break. Something has changed. They've had a coffee break, they come back to the job, something has changed. And you guys seem to be typically seeing incidents at that point. So actually, what if we stop and we consider these error precursors? Are there any new ones that we didn't see before? Has the conditions changed? The most common precursors that we see for SAPs, and I've been talking to somebody who I've worked with in the past from your industry, because I wanted to check if you were seeing the same things in your industry as we were seeing in generation, particularly in nuclear generation most recently. And these were the things that we saw in terms of error precursors commonly encountered by our SAPs, who are typically taking isolations within nuclear power stations. So distractions, fatigue is a common one, and fatigue is really coming up again and again recently in a number of industries. Communication problems. So are we really being clear? Do you remember I said earlier about leaders inadvertently reinforcing the undesired behaviours? Yeah, things like that. There can be objective conflicts and communication issues there. Unscheduled jobs suddenly appearing. Is that something that you guys experience? Yeah. Unscheduled jobs suddenly slotted into the working day or the working week. So we've got a plan, we've maybe had a start a shift brief or a pre-job brief, and then something else comes in, the conditions have changed. What are our processes? What's the method for stopping and taking account of that? And you have the extra additional challenge that your guys are spread out all over the country or all over your region. How do you make sure as leaders that that is happening, if that is what your standard says? If we're going to change it, the job circumstances, if the conditions change, our standard is that you stand down, you rebrief, you reconsider. How are you making sure that that is happening? What checks and balances have you got in place? A job written up incorrectly, so again, this is something we see quite often, so it may be, in a generation environment, the wrong plant label ID or something like that, yes. So I'm not sure what the equivalent would be for you guys, but I'm sure that you'll encounter this in terms of preparation of permits. Operated the wrong device, is that something that you say? Yeah, definitely. I mean, you go into a power station and you've got 4 generating units, 4 sets, and you would be amazed at how easy it is for an operator to end up on the wrong unit. So we've coloured, we paint some green and some pink and some blue and some orange, but guess what? They can still go and stand on and operate something on the wrong unit. So actually, what are the things we need to put in place? How are we making sure that we're setting these guys up to succeed when they go out there? And time pressures and things like that. And one of the things we heard this morning with the case study, it's an amazing case study, and so tragic. But how did that? It's always the good guys, by the way. Do you notice that? It's always the good guys who have the accidents or make mistakes or have the errors, and we're left scratching our heads thinking, oh, he's got so much experience. But how did that highly experienced guy end up on that platform, that high up, with 2 trainees, if that was a breach of the company's rules? Was that his fault? Did he choose? I don't know. I don't know. But these are the kind of things that we say, well, how was that able to happen? Thank you. Am I okay to just go through this one? Yeah. So, setting up for success. What are some of the tools that we can put in place? And certainly, what I'll do is I'll make some information. If any of you want to have a bit of a deeper dive into any of these areas, I'll make some information available to you through Mike and the team. Strategic approach to training, including that just-in-time refresher training. So what is it? How often? What's the frequency of your training? How good is your training? Are you making sure that it's a strategic approach to your training? So what skills do they need? Where do they need them? Have we got enough people trained? Do we need to have something whereby if somebody hasn't operated a system or they haven't done a particular task or activity in 3 months, we need some way of delivering that just-in-time training? Now that might be where your toolbox talk comes in. But what is it that you've got that you can refresh that training frequently? A thorough pre-job brief, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Good quality, accurate procedures. You won't have them. I'll be very surprised if you have, good quality, accurate procedures, because I've not come across anyone with them yet. And if your guys don't follow procedures generally, and you investigate an incident and you say rewrite the procedure, how is that going to fix the problem? Your guys don't follow procedures. And I see that in so many organisations where the corrective action is rewrite the procedure, retrain the worker. The worker was doing what he's always done. He was following a procedure that wasn't good enough. It didn't look like it did on the job. Okay. Detailed, accurate permits to work and clear and concise communications, including this 3-part comms, which I'm assuming some of you will understand. Repeat backs, etc., using the phonetic alphabet and all of those kind of things. If those aren't standard in your industry, then really look at these tools. And if you want someone to go and look at where this is done really well, obviously emergency services, but in particular the rail industry, this is an industry that is really cracked, in my opinion, 3-part comms. Appreciative inquiry, going into what I mentioned earlier this morning, and learning from excellence, because remember, you've got more successful work than failed work. So if you start to get a group of guys together and say, how come you guys always do such a great job? How come you never have any errors? How come nothing ever goes wrong for you guys? What is it that you do so well? They would love to tell you about that. You go on the other end of an event when something's gone wrong, they're not so keen to talk. So appreciative inquiry comes at things from a very different angle. And you've got an absolutely fantastic forum here to do this as a cross-industry thing. We've been doing it in Australia. I really recommend a group of you to get your guys together and start looking at successful work as an industry rather as just one company. It's so powerful when you create that environment for the guys to talk openly and honestly. Pre-job brief. So majority of people I speak to say yes, we always do a pre-job brief, we always set our guys to work, there's a method statement briefing, we go through the risk assessment, etc., etc. In human performance terms, a pre-job brief is specifically looking at what can go wrong. And it's this time that we take when we say, okay, have we done this job before? What happened the last time we did it? What's our operating experience of this job? What went wrong? Or, as we've already discussed, what went well and why did it go well? What are the critical steps? So what are the points of no return in this task that we're doing today? What's the point of which we switch turn that switch or open that door and there is no return from this point? What do we need to do before we take that step? Can we get somebody in to do an independent verification? Do we need to stop, think, act, review? A number of error prevention tools exist. And you don't need to bring somebody like me in to help you with this. You can Google this. This is all widely available on the internet for you. What mistakes, what might we make? And what's the worst thing that could happen? Because it's not always a fatality, actually. And that's what we really need to draw our guys back from when we start talking about what's the worst thing that could happen realistically today and how can we prevent that. The last thing I just wanted to finish on very quickly, and I will finish very quickly, is if you haven't come across this book, and this is a guy called Todd Conklin, and I work very closely with Todd. He has a podcast as well called Pre-Accident Investigations, and I'd really recommend reading this book, for like 15-20 quid. It's such a massive investment, and it will really shake up your understanding of incidents and investigations and how you can drive performance improvement in your organisation. One of the things that Todd talks about is, and let's be clear, you will never engineer out every error. You will never engineer out every incident or every accident because you will assuredly go broke trying or completely insane. Okay, you will never engineer everything out. At the end of the day, you will need to, you will need to engage your workers to try and prevent those errors and accidents. But one of the things that I think is really good food for thought, let's think about the motor industry and the car industry just for a few minutes. So the car industry works on a very different basis that some of our industries tend to work on. So they have an acceptance that the driver cannot be changed. Yeah, the driver is flawed. And no matter what you do, the driver will always make the same mistake. He won't have a quick enough response time, he'll drive too fast, he might drive too slow, whatever. So the motor industry has this acceptance. So what does it do? What does it do in terms of improving safety?
Driverless cars.
Sorry?
Driverless cars.
Driverless cars, yeah, maybe we'll go to driverless cars. But what's it been doing over the years?
Driver age.
It's protecting you, driver age, yeah, where they've mandated wearing seatbelts, things like that, yeah. But the cars, they're like glorified computers these days, aren't they? Because there's so many safety features built into those vehicles. What about our roads? What are they doing with the roads?
Nothing.
Nothing. So is anybody using the M6 or the M1 recently? Smart motorways, yeah? Okay, we're even looking at the roads, not all successfully in some towns where you live, I have to say, but we look at the road signage, street lighting, the visual aids on roads, etc., because we acknowledge that drivers are they're a kind of flawed thing that we can't necessarily fix. So we have to try and engineer it where we can. How amazing would it be that if other industries took that approach to keeping our people safe, yeah? That before starting with the worker and saying, why the hell did he or she do that again? Why don't we start with, what can we do to make sure that when we put this person to work today, we build a bubble around them that keeps them as safe as we practically can?